So the first thing that stood out to me was that Jesus' disciples, the people who he was closest to, were going through the exact same feelings that I had gone through. They were struggling with seeing God and believing in him, even when they saw him work in others' lives. Now, I feel like whenever you hear someone's faith story, there's always an aha moment or a time that everything clicked for them. For me, my faith journey began, like most kids, getting baptized after I was born, saying the same prayer every night with my mom, and going to church school every Sunday. When I got to middle school, we moved to Good Shepherd, and I joined confirmation, and I already had a bunch of friends because a lot of them went to school with me. I continued to show up to confirmation because my parents made me, but as I like to describe it, I was just going through the motions. But then I finished confirmation, I got confirmed, and I thought, perfect. Now I can focus on things that matter, like Fortnite and staying at home and doing nothing. But then my mom decided that me and my brother needed to be more involved in the church even after we got confirmed. So she dropped us off at Wednesday night youth room and said she'll be back in about an hour. Cole and I walked downstairs and we stopped right around the corner before walking into the youth room. And we were scared to go in. We didn't want to, and it wasn't something that we wanted to do. But after a few rounds of rock, paper, scissors, we eventually decided that I would walk in first and then he would walk right behind me. As soon as we walked in, Ashley, the youth director at the time, immediately welcomed us in, and we found some snacks and found a couch to sit on. Then, unknown to us, it was time for highs and lows, which, for anyone who hasn't been in youth room, highs and lows is just saying a good and a bad thing from your week. But to me, little freshman me, this was speaking in front of 1 million people, and I was super nervous. But I got through it, and I started showing up to youth room whenever I could. I eventually found my group and started going basically every week. But I was still kind of just going through the motions. Fast forward to my sophomore year, I started youth room again, and I found my group, and everything was going well. I was showing up whenever I could, so pretty much every week. About a month into youth room, Ashley started talking about this thing called LYO, which is she practically forced the sign-up sheet into my hands, which I didn't know anything about it, so I asked my friends if they were going, and they all said that they were, so I decided that I would go. The day rolled around for LYO, and I drove to the bus with my carry-on suitcase and a backpack full for the one-night, 2-day trip to Minot, which, for any of you guys wondering, you do not need a whole carry-on suitcase and a backpack for a one-night trip in Minot. But we got to LYO, and everything was a blast. We had so many things to do, like breakout groups, karaoke, 9 Square, and so much more. Along with that, we went around Minot and did a bunch of different service projects, like raking leaves at the zoo. Once we got back to Bismarck, I decided I needed to go to youth room more, but I was still just kind of going through the motions. I went through the school year, and that summer the church took us to Florida for a mission trip. I spent the week getting to know so many new faces and making an impact in the most affected areas from hurricanes. During that trip, I really started to listen in on the devotions and Bible studies. I started to try and take notes of how I saw God working in my life and in others around me. I began to start praying almost daily. When I got to my junior year, I went to youth room every single week and started teaching church school with my friend Emerson. Church was finally becoming a staple in my life. But then I still kind of noticed that I was just going through the motions. Around Thanksgiving, my youth leader, Ashley, gave us the news that she would be moving to Minneapolis at the end of the year. Nobody knew how to feel, and we all knew that, but all we knew was that we had 4 more Wednesdays with her. So, as swim season approached, as swim season started for me, usually I don't go to youth room, but I knew I needed to show up, so I did. After Christmas break, we came back from the youth room and things were off. We didn't really know what would be next or who would be our next youth director, but we knew that we would have some of our other leaders, adult leaders, in youth room, like Taylor and Laney. I prayed that we would get a new youth director and that things would go back to normal soon. Our church was set to go to the ELCA National Youth Gathering that coming summer in New Orleans. So luckily, Mike, one of the youth members' dads, had led a group a few times to the National Youth Gathering in the past, so he decided that he would step up and lead us. When the first meeting rolled around, Not many people knew what the trip entailed because it only comes around every 3 years, and because of COVID, it got canceled, so it would have been about 6 years since anything had happened, so there wasn't people to tell us how it was. But we eventually found out that the National Youth Gathering is just like LYO, but on steroids. From then, after the meeting, I talked to Mike after things were off during the meeting, and we decided to set up some student leads for our trip so that they would help plan and present meetings. Mike and I decided that I would run the first meeting, or the next meeting, right with him. And so when the next meeting rolled around, I stood up in front of all the parents and the youth and ran the meeting with Mike. This meeting seemed to go much better than the first one, and we found a group of students that were willing to help with the meeting. With every meeting, things just kept getting better and better, and we started to kind of get our footing. We got to the trip, and after 3 long flights, we arrived in New Orleans. During that week, I spent the week meeting so many new people, experiencing New Orleans culture, and I got to help build hurricane relief kits. But there was still one big thing that stood out to me during that trip. The first night that I walked in to the stadium for the mass gathering, I got shivers and goosebumps all over. And I didn't think anything of it at the start until it started happening every single time we walked into the stadium. Eventually, during one of the nightly devotions, we talked about seeing God and feeling God, and where we saw that in our lives and during that week. As I thought more about it, every single time I walked into the stadium, every single time I walked into LYO, every time I listened to a sermon that really resonated with me, I would get shivers throughout my entire body. This was my aha moment, the moment where everything sort of clicked for me, and I really was putting all the pieces together and putting a face and a feeling to God in my life. From then on, I began to notice it in many more places and found much more things that I saw God in. As I begun my senior year, most of my friends had already graduated, but I was still optimistic. I went to LYO and taught church school and fell back into my church routine. But outside of church, at school, I was suffering from what most teachers would call senioritis, which affects basically every single senior in high school. I hated going to school, and especially going to my English class. I prayed that things would get better, or that I could fast forward and skip to the second semester already. When second semester finally rolled around, I was well behind on deciding where I wanted to go for college. Forever, my plan had been to go to BSc for 2 years and then go up to UND. But I was juggling between 3 schools after I had applied to Grand Canyon University down in Phoenix, Arizona. I planned college visits and got a good feel for all of the schools, but still, I didn't know which one was right for me. BSc was financially a no-brainer, and all of my friends were at UND, but for some reason, there was something pulling me towards GCU, aside from the weather being warm year-round. I started praying on it, and for weeks, I went back and forth almost daily on which college I would go to. About a month ago, I came across the quote, "You prayed for now." Now, at first, I didn't think anything of this quote, but then I started to think on it, and when I was scared to even walk into the youth room back freshman year, I went through the motions, and I prayed for the courage to walk in. Now, I walk into youth room every single week without even batting an eye at it. When Ashley left and we needed a new youth director and someone to lead us to the youth gathering, I prayed for someone to step up, and we got Mike, and now we have Taylor as our new youth director. When my senior year didn't start how I wanted it, and I didn't really like my English teacher, I prayed that things would get better, and now I wouldn't ask for a different English teacher. When I was bouncing around on colleges and I couldn't decide, I prayed for God to help me, and now I'm 99% sure that I know where I'm going. Jesus said to the disciples that didn't believe he was the Messiah, he said, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me." All of those things that I prayed for, Jesus helped provide me with, even when I was just going through the motions. So, I challenge everyone in this room. I challenge you guys, especially those of you in confirmation and high school, keep showing up, keep praying, and keep going through the motions. And trust God and his plan, even when you feel like God is not around. Thank you.